Okay, so this will be a quick video of my sushi base setup, the logic that I used for it. I'll show the base layout first and then I'll kind of talk through some of it. I'm in creative mode just to show the proof of concept. I don't have my old map that I did this in a regular gameplay. But as you can see here, all of the items are on the same belt that loops back through. There are technically, I needed 3 lines for the wires to make this work. So I use green twice on 2 isolated systems. There's a red and green wire that go down along the poles on the right side here. So a red and a green wire that connects to both outputs and inputs. These red and greens are used to either add to demand or remove from demand. So you'll see they're always pulses. They only flicker here in the corner because they're only when something's added to or taken away from the belt. On the other side, this side's only used to tell everything what the current demand is. All of these numbers, the system wants to reduce them to 0. So as they put items onto the belt, these numbers will decrease. Okay, so it works down through everything. We've got smelters in here. This will craft everything up to yellow. It doesn't currently do science packs. It also does all of this super slowly, but you could, in principle, copy this whole thing and paste it down beside it to do it all again. So how does this work? I'll try to go through this as quickly as possible, so it probably won't be the best tutorial. I just want to do a quick overview of this. This here is going to be what holds the demand. A equals A is always true, so it will always release everything unless you need to reset it. You can change it to greater than. I'm going to set it back to equals. You'll see on the lower left there are no items currently in this request. If I put any iron in here, nothing happens. We'll put 1 in, and we need to give some sort of a demand here. So I'm going to turn this for now. I made this section just to give a single pulse of these values through, so this will give us 10, which as soon as there was a value of 10, it picked up the 1 iron. Let me get that back here. And now there's only a demand of 9. If I put 1 more iron in, takes 1 out, now we have a demand of 8. Normally, you don't want to pick up off of the belt because that takes from the demand without it being added back to the system. So this one here, logic's pretty straightforward. If iron plate is greater than 0, then it's going to pick stuff up, and that along the green line here tells it what the current demand is of that now 8 iron plates. The red line is where it will pulse along this to this arithmetic combinator, which takes any signal it receives and turns it into a negative value, and then outputs that same value, only negative, right back into our memory cell, which is keeping count of what our demand is as we add and subtract. So how do we add back to the demand? As this only takes away from the demand, we need to add back to it. When any system or storage or anything picks up, we don't have any logic to enable or disable, just always going to pick things up off of the belt, so we can limit it in other ways. So we do that. When we turn this way, it'll pick up the 2. It does still have the pulse logic for the read, so that goes along the line here directly into the memory cell and adds it back. So now we have 10. So if we drop 200 in here, You'll note that it will go negative on the numbers here every occasionally, because it is picking up in stack sizes, but it balances itself out. So if it goes a couple negative, it'll have to go a couple positive before it'll pick up again. So the little bit of wiggle room there doesn't hinder much. So it'll continue until this reaches 100 steel, and then it'll leave 10 circling around on the belts, probably 12 circling around on the belts for all of time. Just let that finish up there. So now this stops. Oh, this is at an exact 10. This is at 100. So that's the basics of it. Everything else is just making sure that you get the wiring right. You have the one signal for what the current demand is, and the two signals for either reducing or increasing demand. So this just shows that you can do the same thing using the logic on the belts, the same way that we have the logic on the input arm on the other side. Everything else here is exactly the same. We're requesting iron plates from the demand that we gave using our little pulse. This logic here shared by the entire system. Every thing will share the logic just from basically these two. Once these have given the requirements, don't even need to keep those around. These two here hold all the logic for the demand. So, as mentioned, the wiring is the toughest part. This is the same setup, just with an infeed of all the basic raw materials. I used the filter for sulfuric acid barrels because I'm never going to have sulfuric acid barrels, and I didn't want these outer ones used anyways. It was just a way to merge all of these resources onto one belt. There's no current demand at this section here. Let's go ahead and reduce this to something like that for the moment. So setting up blueprints is going to be really important to consistency in this structure. We'll do just these at the moment. That completes the loop. And why didn't these not get power? We'll toggle this to give demand. You can see the values dropped a little bit of negative, but that's alright. They're going to get picked up by the smelters, and then new ores will be called upon as needed. There may be a little buffering issue with the... what happened? Okay, so immediately what you need to notice here is the wires aren't connected. If you don't connect the wires, your system's not going to work. So grab supplies. So this is the biggest risk that you have when doing this, is the tediousness of cleaning up after your own mistakes. But I've cleared the belt now. I'm going to clear the system. That's off, okay. By just switching this back to greater than and then up to equal. So that's empty. I need to, as I mentioned before, I have the red and green for the pulses always set up on the right side. So this line has to go into the negative. It will reduce our demand. Anytime a signal pulses on red, we're reducing our demand. We'll go green from the same pole to the input of the memory cell. We're increasing our demand if we have a pulse on the green, which you'll see, it's kind of hard to see here, but you see the wires that light up for these green lines go only to the ones, these green lines go only to the ones that are picking up off of the belt, because these are the ones that are removing from what's in the circle. So you have to increase the demand to call more of that supply. Whereas for the reds have two lines. The red portion of the line that goes to this side will reduce the demand as it adds more stuff to the belt. The green portion goes up the other side and is what's being requested, and it's used to disable it when we no longer want it active. So we've got only the red wire connected. Oh wait, and we got the green wire connected here. We also need to connect this green wire. We've got to be very careful to connect it to the output of the memory cell. That way. Alright, so now that we have the demand on, it's running through the loop again. Now you'll see it's working correctly as iron and copper ore are pulled up here and new stone as they're smelted into their component parts. So just quickly, one last portion just to show expanding this. If we do this, don't have to change this. This can stay down like that while you're working, but I prefer it not to all lump to one side, so I'll twist that around really quick. Again, only thing we need to do is make sure that we attach the wires correctly. Once the wires are attached, we can bring this up here and start deciding what we want these to be. Anything that you have it crafting here, you need to make sure that you're equally telling it here what item it will be putting onto the belt when it comes. So this can only be enabled when the gear is there. And I made sure to set them up so that they're blank by default. They won't place until you choose the item that's supposed to be placed. So we could say that. We could do. Let's see. That's got to be red, so it'll drop those back out. That's got to be wires. So I'll drop wires back in and chips. Green chips. So there, that will all work in time. Right now the steel's eating up all of the iron that comes out of this little guy. So we may decide that we want to increase our smelting, perhaps specifically our smelting for iron, and Q to break the line and create the new one. And I'm going to change these to just all be for the iron plates, all connected, and just like that, we've expanded another section of smelting just pure iron in this area, which will help increase the throughput of iron on the belt. And also going to increase, the demand isn't going to increase, but might see more throughput just because there's more. So you can, obviously at this point we're going to go through much more iron, so we set that to like 90, shut it off, turn it back on. We have a higher demand for iron now, which you'll see go right up through there. Alright, I hope you found this interesting. I quite enjoy making these little loops like this.